They tell you that a company is a machine. They say it's about profit, margins, efficiency, and the bottom line. But that's not how they sell it to you. Not anymore. In the modern world, they don't sell you a job. They sell you a belonging. They sell you a tribe. They look you in the eye and promise you that you aren't just a cog in a wheel, but a vital organ in a living body. My name is Arthur. For 5 years, I didn't just work for Summit Logistics. I was Summit Logistics. I was the director of operations, the man behind the curtain, the guy who made sure that when you clicked buy on a Tuesday night, the package arrived at your door on Thursday morning without you ever wondering how it got there. I was the architect of the invisible. I want you to picture the office. It wasn't a gray cubicle farm or one of those soulless industrial parks on the edge of the highway. It was a cathedral of glass and light in downtown Seattle, overlooking the Sound. The air inside didn't smell like toner and stale carpet. It smelled like expensive roasted coffee, ozone, and rain. We didn't have employees. We had partners. We didn't have managers. We had team leads. We didn't have problems. We had friction points. At the center of it all, holding the sun in place, was Julian. Julian wasn't a boss. He was a gravitational force. He was 42, with the kind of energy that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even if there were 100 people watching. He didn't walk through the office. He patrolled it, learning names, asking about sick parents, remembering children's birthdays, noting who liked almond milk and who drank their coffee black. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel seen, really seen, in a way that most people go their whole lives without experiencing. Every Friday at 4 p.m., we had the huddle. It was mandatory, but nobody resented it. 200 of us would gather in the central atrium, the light pouring in from the skylights. Julian would stand on a wooden shipping crate. He didn't like stages. He said they created separation, artificial hierarchy, and he would speak. "Look to your left," he would say, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that silenced the room instantly. "Look to your right. This isn't your coworker. This is your family. We spend more time together than we do with our spouses. We bleed for this. We sweat for this. And when we win together." I believed him. God, I believed him. I was 34, single, and deeply introverted. My apartment was a place I stored my clothes and slept. Summit was where I lived. It was where I mattered. When I worked until 10 p.m. fixing a routing error for a shipment of medical supplies to Alaska, I didn't feel exploited. I didn't feel like I was being underpaid for my overtime. I felt essential. I felt like I was protecting the family. I felt like a guardian. My routine was a study in precision. I would arrive at 7:15 a.m. before the cleaners had even finished the third floor. I liked the silence. I liked the hum of the servers. I would check the global tracking dashboard, watching the little green dots move across the map of the world. Ships in the Pacific, trucks in the Midwest, planes over the Atlantic. Verify the overnight air freight from Shenzhen. Check the customs clearance in Hamburg. Coffee. Black. 2 sugars. I had a team of 12 analysts under me. They were young, bright, hungry kids out of top schools, and they looked up to me. To them, I was the fixer. If a shipment was stuck in customs in Brazil, Artie could get it out. If a truck broke down in rural Ohio during a snowstorm, Artie knew a local contractor who could do a transload at 3 a.m. I was the mechanic who kept the engine running so smooth that nobody even knew it had an engine. I remember one specific morning in October. It was raining, that relentless Seattle drizzle that turns the world gray. The office was quiet, the only sound the soft typing of early risers. Julian stopped by my desk. He didn't have a meeting. He didn't have a clipboard. He just leaned against the partition, holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on my desk. "You're the engine, Artie," he said softly, looking out at the rain streaking the glass. "The shiny stuff on the outside. The marketing, the sales team, the press releases? That's just noise. That's just confetti. You're the reason this heart beats. You keep the blood moving." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a bottle of aged scotch. Blue label. He set it down next to my keyboard. "No occasion. Just a gesture. Take a breath this weekend, Art," he said. "We're going to need you at 100% for the Ascension." The Ascension. That was Julian's code name for our upcoming IPO. We were going public. Everyone was going to be rich. The stock options we had been hoarding, the lower-than-market salaries we had accepted in exchange for equity, it was all about to pay off. It was going to turn into houses, tuitions, early retirements. I looked at that bottle like it was a medal of honor. I didn't drink it. I put it on my shelf at home, unopened. I didn't know then that he was grooming me. I didn't know that loyalty is the most dangerous blindfold you can wear because you tie it yourself. I didn't know that the warmth I felt was the warmth of a fire that was slowly burning the ground out from under my feet. The unease started with something small. A glitch. A single pixel out of place in a high-definition image. We were preparing the final quarterly reports for the IPO prospectus. I'm a creature of data. I find comfort in spreadsheets. Numbers are safe. People lie. People change. People have hidden agendas. But numbers? 2 plus 2 is always 4. Data doesn't have an ego. Data doesn't have a strategy. I was reviewing the Q3 logistics costs, line by line. I wanted our margins to look perfect for the investors. I found a discrepancy in the fuel surcharges for a vendor called Logos Transport. It was a minor carrier, a small trucking fleet we used for overflow when the big carriers like FedEx or UPS were capped out. The surcharge was 40% higher than the market rate. If the national average for diesel surcharges was 12%, Logos was billing us at nearly 17%. It was small in the grand scheme. Maybe $5,000 total over the quarter. In a company doing $200 million in revenue, it was dust. It was a rounding error. Most directors would have ignored it. But I wasn't most directors. I was the fixer. I flagged it. I sent a casual email to the CFO, Greg. Hey Greg, looks like Logos Transport is overbilling us on the fuel index. Probably just an old rate card in their system. Want me to push back and get a credit? I hit send and went back to my work, not thinking anything of it. 10 minutes later, Julian walked into my office. Not Greg, Julian. The CEO of the company walked down 3 flights of stairs to see me. He closed the door behind him. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't angry either. He looked concerned, like a parent about to have a difficult conversation with a child. Art, he said, sitting on the edge of my desk, invading my personal space in that way that felt like intimacy rather than aggression. Greg forwarded me your note. About Logos. Yeah, I said, spinning my pen in my fingers. Just a billing error. I can handle it. I'll call their billing department this afternoon. Don't, Julian said. I paused. My pen stopped spinning. Don't fix it. Logos is a special relationship, Julian said, his eyes locking onto mine. He lowered his voice. They helped us out of a tight jam back in the early days. When nobody else would touch our freight because we were a startup, Logos moved our boxes. We pay a premium for their loyalty. It's a grandfathered agreement. A handshake deal. Just let it slide. It throws off the margin analysis for that sector. I argued gently. If the auditors see a 40% variance, they're going to ask why we aren't using a cheaper carrier. Art. Julian smiled, the warmth returning to his face like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. Trust me, I see the big picture. You see the pixels. That's why you're great at what you do. But let me handle the relationships. You keep the trucks moving. Okay, can you do that for me? Okay, I said. I can do that. He patted my shoulder, squeeze, release, and left. It seemed harmless. A CEO protecting an old vendor. Loyalty rewarding loyalty. That fit the narrative. That fit the family culture. We take care of the people who took care of us. But as I looked at the spreadsheet, the number bothered me. 40% wasn't a premium. It was robbery. And why did Greg forward the email to Julian immediately? Why didn't Greg just say leave it alone? Why did the CEO have to come down here? I closed the laptop. I told myself to let it go. Julian was the visionary. I was just the mechanic. But that night, for the first time in 5 years, I didn't sleep well. A question hung in the dark of my bedroom, unresolved, buzzing like a fly I couldn't swat. Why did the CEO walk down 3 flights of stairs to talk about a $5,000 invoice? November came, and the rain turned to sleet. The pressure for the IPO ramped up. The motto in the office changed from "We are family" to "Sprint to the finish." The music in the atrium got faster. The free food got better, but the hours got longer. We were working 6 days a week. People were sleeping in the nap pods. I started seeing more anomalies. It wasn't just Logos Transport anymore. It was inventory weights. I was auditing the warehouse reports from our Nevada distribution center. The digital manifest, our internal system, said we shipped 50,000 units of high-end consumer electronics. Headphones, tablets, smartwatches. High value, high density. But the weigh station data, The independent scale reports from the trucking company that actually hauled the trailers showed the trucks were light, significantly light. If you put 50,000 tablets in a truck, the truck gets heavy. Physics is non-negotiable. But these trucks were rolling across the scales at weights that suggested they were half empty. If the trucks were light, there were only two possibilities. Either the boxes were empty or the product didn't exist. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the packaging changed? Maybe we switched to lighter packing foam? Maybe the manufacturer reduced the weight of the casing? I called the warehouse manager in Nevada, a guy named Miller. We'd had beers together at the last Christmas party. "Hey Miller," I asked, keeping my voice light. "Did we change the dunnage on the Veritex shipment? The weights are way off on the outbound logs." There was a long pause on the line. Too long. I heard background noise, forklifts beeping, people shouting, but Miller was silent. Yeah, Art." Miller sounded breathless, like he'd just run up a flight of stairs. "Yeah, new eco-friendly bubble wrap. Featherlight stuff. Julian signed off on it personally." "Julian signed off on bubble wrap?" I asked. "The CEO is approving packing materials? He's hands-on man. You know that. Look, I gotta go. Truck coming in." He hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone receiver. My stomach felt heavy, like I'd swallowed a stone. Miller was a bad liar. And Julian. Julian didn't care about bubble wrap. Julian cared about stock price. I decided to bring it up at the weekly ops meeting. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't use the word fraud. I just put the data on the screen. "We have a discrepancy in shipping weights versus build inventory," I said, pointing to the graph. "It looks like phantom stock. The system says we have X, but the physical reality says we shipped Y." The room went quiet. The other directors looked at their notebooks. Nobody looked at me. Julian laughed. He actually laughed. He leaned back in his leather chair at the head of the table and chuckled. "Oh, Artie." He shook his head, smiling at the room. "Always the pessimist. This is why we need you. You worry, so we don't have to. But you're looking at the legacy data. The system hasn't updated the tear weights for the new packaging yet. It's a software lag. It's been 3 weeks, Julian," I said, my voice steady but my heart hammering. "The system updates in real time. I wrote the update code myself." Julian's face hardened. Just for a microsecond. A flicker of coldness behind the eyes, like a shark breaking the surface of the water. Then, the mask returned. "You're stressed?" he announced to the room. "Look at him, everyone. Look at the bags under his eyes. Art is working himself to death for us. Art, take Friday off. Seriously, go get a massage. Go hike a mountain. We'll manually reconcile the weights." The room applauded. They applauded my burnout. They applauded his generosity. I felt shame. I felt like I was being difficult. He's right, I thought. I'm paranoid. I'm tired. I'm seeing ghosts where there are just glitches. I took Friday off. I tried to relax. But my brain wouldn't stop. It kept doing the math. Even if the packaging was made of air, the weights didn't add up. When I returned on Monday, there was a new intern at the desk next to mine. Sarah. Bright, young, eager, fresh out of college. "Hi, Arthur," she chirped. "I'm helping with the data entry. Julian asked me to clean up the logo's transport files." I froze. "Clean them up?" I asked, putting down my coffee slowly. "Yeah, just recategorizing some of the older expenses as consulting instead of shipping." "For tax reasons," he said. My blood ran cold. "You can't change a shipping expense to consulting. That's not accounting. That's history revision. That's changing the nature of the transaction to hide what the money was actually for. Shipping costs affect gross margin. Consulting costs affect operating expenses. Moving them artificially inflates the gross margin, making the company look more profitable than it is." "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice very, very quiet. "Did he ask you to use your own login?" "No," she said, innocent as a lamb. "He gave me an admin key. He said it was yours, actually, since you were out on Friday and he didn't want to bother you." I felt the room spin. He had used my credentials. Or rather, he had given a 22-year-old intern my digital identity to commit fraud while I was sitting on my couch, taking a break. I looked at my computer screen. It didn't look like a tool anymore. It looked like a weapon that had just been fired, and my fingerprints were on the trigger. I realized then that I wasn't the engine. I was the insulation. I was the layer of protection between Julian and the law. If anyone looked, it wasn't Julian cooking the books. It was Arthur. It was Artie the fixer. I stood up. I needed to walk. I needed to breathe. I walked past Julian's glass office. He was on the phone, feet up on the desk, laughing. He saw me. He gave me a thumbs up. A big, enthusiastic thumbs up. I didn't thumb back. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. The mirror showed a man who looked 5 years older than he was. My eyes were red. My skin was pale. Denial is a survival mechanism, I told myself. If I admit this is real, my life is over. My stock options are worthless. My career is dead. My friends are accomplices. So I did what humans do. I bargained. Maybe it's just tax optimization. Maybe it's gray, but not black. Maybe he's just trying to pump the numbers a little for the IPO, and then he'll fix it. But then I remembered the weights. The light trucks. That wasn't tax optimization. That was theft. That was selling air to investors. I went back to my desk. I didn't confront Sarah. I didn't storm into Julian's office. I sat down. And for the first time in 5 years, I didn't work. I didn't fix anything. I watched. I waited until Wednesday. I needed the building to be empty, or as empty as it ever got. The janitorial crew usually started on the top floors and worked their way down. So by 11 p.m., the executive level was silent, save for the hum of the HVAC system and the distant wail of sirens down on 4th Avenue. I told the night security guard, a man named Marcus who spent his shifts watching Netflix on his phone, that I had to reset a router in the server room. He didn't even look up. He just waved a hand at me, a gesture of absolute indifference that felt like permission to enter the underworld. The server room was in the basement. It was a different world down there. Upstairs was all glass, wood, and warmth. Down here, it was concrete, steel, and cold. The air conditioning was set to 60 degrees to keep the racks from overheating. It hit me the moment I opened the heavy steel door, a wall of frigid air that smelled of ozone and dust. The only light came from the blinking LEDs on the server racks, 1,000 little red and green eyes watching me in the dark. I couldn't use my normal workstation upstairs. If IT was monitoring keystrokes, and if Julian was as paranoid as I suspected, they'd see me digging. They'd lock me out before I found the body. I needed to go to the source. I plugged my laptop directly into the backup array via a physical Cat6 cable. I wasn't looking for the live data. The live data was what Sarah was cleaning upstairs. I was looking for the ghost logs. In every database architecture, there is a transaction history that happens before the data is committed and scrubbed. It's the digital equivalent of a rough draft. It's messy, it's raw, and it's usually permanent. My fingers felt stiff in the cold air as I typed the command lines. Sudo access /root/logs/transaction_history v. The screen filled with cascading text. A waterfall of white code on a black background. I filtered for logos transport. There it was. It wasn't just fuel surcharges. That was just the tip of the iceberg, the little bit of snow showing above the water. Logos transport was a shell. It had no fleet. It had no drivers. It was a billing entity. I traced the routing numbers attached to the invoices. They didn't go to a trucking depot in Ohio. They went to a correspondent bank in New York, and from there, instantly wired to a bank in Cyprus. And from Cyprus, they settled into a holding company called Aurora Holdings. I sat there on a plastic stool, shivering, watching the money move. Millions. Over the last 2 years, Julian had siphoned nearly $4 million out of the company through these fake shipping costs. But that wasn't the part that made my heart stop. I decided to pull the incorporation documents for Aurora Holdings. If Julian was sloppy, maybe his name was on it. If he was smart, it would be anonymous. He wasn't sloppy, and he wasn't anonymous. I pulled up the PDF of the signatory page. I zoomed in. The name on the bottom line, the managing director of the shell company stealing millions from our investors, wasn't Julian. It was Arthur. It was me. My digital signature was stamped clearly on the bottom line. My notary seal, the one I kept in my top drawer, the one Julian borrowed sometimes for expedited customs paperwork, was there. My personal identification number was attached to the bank account in Cyprus. I stared at the screen, my breath fogging in the freezing air. The hum of the servers seemed to get louder, turning into a roar in my ears. I had never signed those documents. I had never been to Cyprus. But I remembered the blanket authorization forms Julian had asked me to sign 3 years ago. Just standard ops stuff, Artie, he had said. So I don't have to bug you every time we need to move a truck across a border. He hadn't just stolen money. He had built a frame. A perfect, watertight frame. If the SEC looked, they wouldn't see Julian. the charismatic CEO who remembered your kids' birthdays. They would see Arthur, the quiet, introverted director of operations who stayed late every night. They would see me siphoning millions into an offshore account in my own name. I was the retirement plan. I was the scapegoat. I felt bile rise in my throat. I stood up and kicked the plastic stool. It clattered across the concrete floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the servers. I wanted to burn the building down. But I forced myself to breathe. Panic is death, I told myself. Panic is what he expects. I pulled the USB drive out of the server. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I put it in my pocket. I had the evidence. But evidence of what? That my account stole the money? If I went to the police with this now, I'd just be turning myself in. I needed more. I needed intent. I needed proof that I was the puppet, not the master. I disconnected my laptop and wiped the local access log. I walked out of the server room, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. I took the elevator up to the main floor. I needed to get out of there. I needed fresh air. But when the elevator doors opened on the executive level, I saw a light. Julian's office. The door was cracked open. He was still there. It was midnight. I shouldn't have stopped. I should have kept walking. But I heard voices. I crept closer, staying in the shadows of the hallway, pressing my back against the wall where the janitor hadn't vacuumed yet. Arthur is asking questions about the weights again, Julian said. His voice carried clearly in the silent office. It wasn't the warm, projected voice he used at the Friday huddles. It was flat, cold. He's loyal, another voice said. It was Greg, the CFO. He won't flip. The guy worships you. Loyalty has a shelf life, Julian said. I heard the distinct sound of a crystal decanter being unstopped, the splash of liquid, the clink of ice. And Arthur's shelf life is expiring. We need to accelerate the timeline. Once the audit is done next week, we cut him loose. You going to fire him? Greg asked. No, Julian laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound that made my skin crawl. If we fire him, he might get litigious. We'll let him resign. We'll call him into a meeting, show him some errors in his department, errors we created, and suggest that he's burned out. We'll offer him a nice severance package that comes with a strict NDA. He'll sign it because he's weak. He needs to feel safe. He's a worker bee, Greg. He doesn't have the stomach for a fight. Weak. I stood there in the dark, listening to the man I looked up to as a brother, a father, a mentor. He was discussing my destruction with the casual tone of someone ordering a sandwich. And if he doesn't resign? Greg asked. Then we find the offshore accounts, Julian said. We act shocked. We call the feds. We tell them our trusted director of operations has been robbing us blind. Either way, I walk away clean. The IPO launches, I cash out, and Artie takes the fall. I realize then that the flowers, the hand on the shoulder, the bottle of scotch, the speeches about family, it was all calibration. He was calibrating me. He was softening me up so the knife would slide in easier. I wanted to burst into the room. I wanted to tackle him. I wanted to strangle him until he admitted it. But I froze. If I walked in there now, the game was over. They would know I knew. They would lock me out of the system instantly. They would destroy the backups. They would call the police and say I was trespassing, that I was unstable. They had the power. They had the narrative. I had to be invisible. I took a step back. Then another. The carpet swallowed the sound of my footsteps. I turned and walked silently to the elevator. I pressed the button and prayed it wouldn't ding. It arrived silently. I got in. I went down to the lobby. I walked past Marcus, who was asleep now. I walked out into the rain. I didn't go home. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 3 hours, watching the lights of the office tower. I watched Julian's light go out at 1 a.m. I watched him drive away in his Porsche. I cried, not out of sadness. I cried because the part of me that believed in people was dying. It was bleeding out in that car. And in its place, something else was waking up. A cold, hard rage that started to crystallize in my chest. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just a mechanic. He thought I was a worker bee. But he forgot one thing. I built the machine. I knew every wire, every routing protocol, every backdoor. He was just the driver. I was the engineer, and I knew where the kill switch was. The next morning, I walked in at 7:15 a.m. sharp. I made the coffee in the break room, just like always. I greeted the receptionist. Morning, Arthur. Morning, Lisa. I smiled. It felt like the skin on my face was made of porcelain and might crack if I moved it too much, but I held it. Julian walked by at 9 a.m. He looked fresh, rested, the picture of success. "Artie, you look intense," he chirped, flashing that $1 million smile. I looked up from my screens. I forced my eyes to be soft, to be the dog that just wants a treat. I forced myself to remember the man I was yesterday, the believer. "Just worried about the audit, Julian," I said, infusing my voice with a tremor of anxiety. "I want everything to be perfect for you. I don't want to let the team down." He stopped. He searched my face for any sign of rebellion, any spark of knowledge. He saw none. He saw exactly what he wanted to see, a useful idiot. "That's my guy," he said, winking. "Don't worry. I'm bringing in a consultant to help with the final prep, just to take the load off your shoulders." "That would be great," I said. "I'm really drowning here. I could use the help." He walked away, satisfied. He thought I was broken. He thought he had won. But under my blazer, taped to the inside of my shirt pocket, a small digital recorder was spinning. I became a ghost in my own office. I stopped fixing things. I stopped routing trucks. I spent my days wandering, confused, asking for help. I needed audio. The documents were signed by me. In a court of law, paper is strong, but voice is stronger. I needed the jury to hear him giving the orders. I needed to prove coercion. I started playing dumb. I would go into his office with problems that required him to say the quiet part out loud. I knocked on his door later that afternoon. "Julian," I said, tapping the recorder through my jacket to ensure it was active. "I'm really confused about this logo's invoice. It says consulting, but it's billed against the shipping budget. The system won't let me clear it. How do I categorize this?" Julian looked up from his phone, annoyed. "Art, we talked about this. Just override it." "But isn't that incorrect?" I pushed, playing the pedantic bureaucrat. "If I override it, it flags as an exception. I don't want to get in trouble." "You won't get in trouble," Julian snapped. He stood up and walked over to me. "Art, stop thinking like an accountant. Think like an owner. Just move the money. I'm authorizing it." "Okay," I said, acting hesitant. "I'll move the money to Aurora Holdings as requested. But I just want to be sure. Aurora is the correct vendor?" "Yes, Aurora. Just do it. Stop wasting my time." "Got him." He said the name. He authorized the transfer. He admitted it wasn't a mistake. I left his office, my heart pounding against the plastic casing of the recorder. I did this for 3 weeks. I built a library of complicity. I recorded him telling me to ignore the weight scales. I recorded Greg joking about the magic inventory. I had hours of it. But recordings weren't enough. They could claim the recordings were taken out of context. They could claim I manipulated them. I needed the smoking gun. I needed the data to speak for itself. Then the consultant arrived. His name was Victor. He wore a suit that cost more than my car. He wasn't a logistics consultant. He was a digital cleaner. I recognized the type. He was there to scrub the hard drives before the auditors arrived. Victor marched to my desk on his first day. "Arthur," he said, not offering a handshake. "Julian wants me to scrub the duplicate entries in the system. I need your admin passwords." "Sure," I said. "Here's the master key." I wrote it down on a sticky note. I handed over the keys to the kingdom. I watched him work. He sat at the terminal, methodically deleting the logo's history. He was wiping the weight discrepancies. He was sanitizing the crime scene, bleaching the digital blood out of the carpet. He was good. He was thorough. But he didn't know about the shadow server in the basement. And he didn't know about the print spooler trick. See, Victor was looking at the database. He wasn't looking at the peripherals. I wrote a script. A simple, elegant piece of Python code. I wrote it at home, on my personal laptop, and brought it in on a flash drive disguised as a car key. I waited until Victor went to lunch. I plugged the drive into the back of the main server rack. I set the code to trigger on the morning of the audit. The script would bypass the main database, the one Victor had scrubbed clean, and pull the raw, unscrubbed data from the hidden backup in the basement. But it wouldn't display it on a screen where it could be deleted. It would send it to the printer queue. Specifically, the high-speed laser printer in the main conference room where the board of directors would be sitting. But I added a delay. It wouldn't print immediately. It would sit in the buffer, waiting. I checked the code 3 times. If user equals auditor_login, then print_logs. It was a trapdoor. It was a dead man's switch. The night before the audit, the office was buzzing with nervous energy. Julian called me into his office one last time. "Art," he said. He was drinking again. "You've been great lately. Really stepping up. I know I've been hard on you." "It's part of the job," I said. After the IPO, he said, leaning forward, his eyes glassy. I'm going to buy you a boat. You like boats. I've never had a boat, Julian, I said. You will. We're going to celebrate. Just tomorrow. Keep your mouth shut during the meeting. Let me do the talking. You just sit there and nod. Can you do that? I can do that, I said. Good man. Get some sleep. Big day. I hung up. I didn't go home immediately. I went to the washroom. I looked in the mirror. I wasn't the same man who had looked in this mirror 5 years ago. That man was soft. That man wanted to belong. The man in the mirror now was hollowed out. But he was sharp. I went home to my empty apartment. I laid out my suit for the next day. Navy blue. Power tie. I wasn't going to nod. The morning of the audit arrived with a brilliant, mocking sunshine. The conference room was freezing, the air conditioned to a sterile chill. The long mahogany table was set like a dinner party for executioners. The auditors from Deloitte sat on one side, a phalanx of gray suits and laptops. The board of directors sat on the other, men and women who controlled billions of dollars, looking at their watches, eager for the presentation to be over so they could count their money. Julian was at the head of the table. He looked like a golden god. He was radiant. He joked with the chairman. He charmed the lead auditor. He was in his element. I sat at the far end of the table, near the credenza where the industrial printer sat. I was the lowest-ranking person in the room. Invisible. Gentlemen and Ms. Chung, Julian began, his voice booming with confidence. Summit Logistics is ready for the world stage. We have cut the fat. We have optimized our routes. Our operational efficiency is unrivaled in the industry. He flashed a slide on the screen. It showed a graph going up and to the right. Profits soaring. Cost dropping. It was a beautiful lie. Ms. Chung, the lead auditor, a stern woman who looked like she ate balance sheets for breakfast, opened her laptop. We've reviewed the digital records provided by your consultant, Victor, she said, her voice dry. On the surface, everything seems in order. However, we have a query about the inventory turnover in the Nevada facility. Arthur can answer that, Julian said, gesturing to me like I was a prop he had brought for show and tell. Arthur, I stood up. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. Julian was smiling, encouraging me to recite the script he had fed me. Just a software lag, Ms. Chung. I took a breath. Actually, I said, my voice calm, filling the room. The digital records you have were modified on Thursday by Victor. Victor, standing by the door, stiffened. His eyes went wide. Julian's smile froze. It didn't drop. It just stopped working, like a video that buffered. Art, you're confused. Those are the consolidated records. You know that. They are the sanitized records. I corrected him, looking directly at Ms. Chung. If the board is interested in the actual company performance and the actual destination of the $4 million missing from the shipping budget, I've taken the liberty of restoring the original transaction logs. Sit down, Arthur, Julian snapped. The charm was gone. The predator was out. He's having a medical episode. I apologize. He's been under a lot of stress. I'm fine, Julian, I said. I turned to the printer behind me. I pressed the flashing green button. Whir. The machine roared to life. It was a high-speed industrial printer, capable of 50 pages a minute. In the quiet room, it sounded like a jet engine spooling up. Chunk, chunk, chunk. Paper started flying out into the output tray. I grabbed the first stack, the pages still warm. I walked over to Ms. Chung. I ignored Julian. I ignored the board. This, I said, placing the stack in front of her, is the raw ledger for Aurora Holdings. You'll notice the transfers match the fuel surcharges from the main account exactly. Ms. Chung adjusted her glasses. She looked at the paper. She looked at the header. She looked at the routing numbers. Then she looked at Julian. Stop that printer, Julian yelled. He stood up, knocking his chair over. Security. Get him out of here. It's on a loop, I said, my voice rising over the noise of the machine. It's printing to every network printer on the floor. The sales team is getting a copy right now. The reception is getting a copy. You can't stop it. The board members were scrambling now, grabbing pages as they flew out of the machine like confetti at a parade from hell. Phantom inventory, one whispered, reading a page. Tax fraud, said another. My God, Julian's face turned purple. The veins in his neck bulged. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see a partner. He didn't see a friend. He saw the end of his life. You signed those, he screamed at me, pointing a shaking finger. Your name is on the accounts. You're the thief. I was trying to cover for you. I was trying to save you. He was trying to flip the narrative. He was trying to use the frame he built. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the small black recorder. I placed it on the mahogany table, right in the center, next to the pitcher of water. I pressed play. Julian's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. Art, stop thinking like an accountant. Just move the money to Aurora. I'm authorizing it. Stop wasting my time. The silence that followed the recording was heavier than anything I had ever felt. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging in the air, waiting for gravity. Julian looked at the recorder. He looked at the board. He looked at me. He saw no fear in my eyes. He saw no admiration. He just saw the engine. The machine he had abused until it broke. You're fired, he whispered, his voice trembling. I resign, I said. I picked up my briefcase. I felt light. I felt weightless. Ms. Chung, I said, I have the full digital forensic copy in my car. I'll be waiting in the lobby for the SEC. I walked to the door. Victor moved out of my way, pressing himself against the wall as if I were contagious. He looked terrified. I opened the door and walked out into the atrium. The sun was streaming in through the glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Behind me, the printer was still churning. Chug, chug, chug. It was the heartbeat of the truth, and it was the only sound that mattered. It didn't happen like in the movies. The police didn't kick down the doors 5 minutes later with guns drawn. Real justice is slower than that. It's quieter. It's a process of paperwork and procedure. I walked down to the lobby. The receptionist, Lisa, was staring at a piece of paper that had just come out of her printer. She looked up at me as I passed. Her face was pale. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She knew. The illusion had shattered in real time, cascading down from the top floor to the front desk in less than 3 minutes. I walked out the front doors and sat on a wet bench near the fountain. It was still raining. It always seemed to be raining in that city, but for the first time, the rain didn't feel depressing. It felt like a rinse. I waited. 20 minutes later, the black sedans arrived. Not the police initially, but the SEC Enforcement Division, followed closely by the FBI. They didn't use sirens. They just pulled up to the curb with a terrifying, silent authority. I watched from the bench. I saw Miss Chung come out to meet them. I saw her point toward the elevators. I saw them go up. An hour later, they came down. They brought Julian out through the side entrance, trying to avoid a scene, but in a glass building, everything is a scene. He wasn't in handcuffs yet. That would come later. But he was flanked by 2 agents who held his arms. He looked smaller. That was the thing that struck me the most. Without the podium, without the lighting, without the adoration of the crowd, he was just a middle-aged man in a suit that was suddenly too big for him. He looked deflated. He stopped for a second before they put him in the car. He looked across the plaza. He saw me sitting on the bench. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just looked at me with a profound confusion. He still didn't understand. He genuinely believed that his charm was a currency that could buy anything, even forgiveness. He looked at me like I had broken the rules of the game. I didn't look away. I watched him get into the car. I watched the door close. I watched them drive away. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I just felt tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went down to the marrow. I got in my car. I drove to the federal building to hand over the hard drive. I gave my statement. And then I went home to my empty apartment, ordered a pizza, and stared at the wall for 4 hours. The fallout was nuclear. The IPO was canceled the next morning. Summit Logistics, the darling of the tech world, the unicorn, dissolved effectively overnight. The stock options that people were banking on for their mortgages, for their kids' colleges, for their retirements, they became worthless paper. Zero. I received hundreds of emails. Some were from co-workers thanking me for exposing the rot. But most were hateful. People blamed me. They didn't blame the man who stole the money. They blamed the man who turned on the light. They blamed me for ruining the dream. They preferred the beautiful lie to the ugly truth because the lie paid the rent. Julian was indicted on 14 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities fraud. The audio recordings were the nail in the coffin. His defense lawyers tried to argue entrapment. They tried to argue that I had doctored the tapes, but the forensic data from the printer didn't lie. He is currently serving 12 years in a federal facility in Oregon. I heard he runs the prison library. I heard he's very popular with the other inmates. He probably calls them a family. I wasn't charged. The Department of Justice viewed me as a cooperating witness and a whistleblower. Technically, I was a hero. But in the corporate world, there are no heroes. There are only liabilities. I lost my career. No logistics firm in the country wanted to hire the guy who wiretapped his CEO. I was radioactive. I applied to Amazon, FedEx, DHL. I got interviews because of my resume. But the moment they realized who I was, the summit snitch, the air would leave the room. They would smile politely, shake my hand, and I would never hear from them again. I spent a year unemployed. I burned through my savings. I moved out of the nice apartment in the city and into a small one-bedroom in the suburbs. I sold the car. I had a lot of time to think. I thought about the late nights. I thought about the huddles. I thought about how desperate I was to belong to something, to be part of a tribe, that I allowed myself to be blind to the knife in my back. I learned to cook. I learned to sleep without medication. I learned that silence isn't something to be afraid of. Today, I work for the municipal water department. It's unglamorous work. The office is beige. The carpet is worn. The coffee is instant and tastes like burnt dust. My boss is a guy named Stan. Stan is 55, wears short-sleeved dress shirts, and has a picture of his golden retriever on his desk. He doesn't know my middle name. He doesn't ask me about my personal growth. He doesn't call me a rock star, or a ninja, or a partner. He calls me Art. At 8 a.m., I clock in. I manage the routing for the maintenance crews. It's simple logistics. Pipe burst on 5th Street. Send crew A. Routine maintenance on the reservoir. Send crew B. At 5 p.m., a bell actually rings. It's an old-school mechanical bell on the wall. Stan stands up. He puts on his jacket. Go home, Art, he says, every single day. Work's done. The water will still be there tomorrow. And I go home. I don't have a corporate family anymore. I don't have a mission to change the world. I don't have stock options. But I have something else. I have my dignity. I have my sleep. And I have the truth. I learned the hard way that a job is a transaction. It is labor for money. It is a contract. It is not love. It is not salvation. It is not a family. Companies will tell you they love you. They will give you hoodies with their logo. They will buy you beer on Fridays. They will tell you that you are changing the world. But the moment the math doesn't work, the moment the ledger turns red, they will cut you without bleeding. So, if you are sitting in a meeting right now, and a charismatic boss is standing on a crate telling you to look to your left and look to your right, if they tell you that we are a family while asking you to look the other way, if they ask for your loyalty before they give you their respect, run. Pack your box. Take your plants. And run. Because the only thing that family will bury is you.